got the Mac and Mac guy, John McMullen and Jody McDonald here hanging with you on Birds 365. And we got one of the best draft analysts around. He does his insightful work for Pro Football Network. Ian Cummings joins us here on Birds 365. Hello, IC. You take a deep breath since this draft is come and gone?
I have a few deep breaths. I need a few more, but we're getting there for sure.
You got to get on 2024, Ian.
I know. That's what I was doing this morning, actually. I felt bad. I was a couple minutes late. I was watching Dallas Turner from Alabama, and I was like, oh, shoot, I got to go get on JAKIB Sports. So, hey, I mean, yeah, the process never ends. The grind never stops. But
all right, give us the scouting report on Dallas Turner, since
I could.
He's an SEC player, Alabama or Georgia. That means he could end up as an Eagle because they got enough of those guys beating those two teams. So give us the Dallas Turner scouting report.
Oh, yeah. I mean, 6'4", 245. I think his arms are near 34 inches, right? So he's got that length too. But I mean, the explosiveness, the bend that this dude has is insane. I mean, he's very quick off the line. He can bend around the arc. He's got the ankle flexion too, but he's got a pretty good power profile as well. It kind of shocks you because he's only 245. He's a little lean, but when he leverages his hips and kind of fully extends, he can knock guys off their center of gravity, man. I'm a big fan of the tools. He's got to, I want to see him keep growing in the hand usage aspect, but all of the physical traits are there for him to be an early first-round pick.
Boy, we can get Hassan Reddick, Nolan Smith, and boom, boom, boom. Who knows? But yeah, too early for. We won't hit you up with too much 2024 yet. So we'll start with 2023, and a lot of flowers given out to Howie Roseman. What were your thoughts on the Eagles, their process, getting two talented Georgia players in the first round?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. And I think especially, we talked before the draft, targeting the defensive line, both defensive tackle and edge. Those are kind of two of the biggest needs in the long term for them. So getting Jalen Carter alongside Jordan Davis, right? And we talked about Carter too, the character concerns, right? The off the field concerns that were kind of hovering over him. I think getting him in a proper supporting cast, especially Georgia teammates to kind of help him guide him along too, could be a very good environment for him. So I was a big fan of that fit at 3-tech as well. Then Nolan Smith as well. I think a lot of the similarities that he shares with Hassan Reddick, the explosiveness, the bend, but he's also a phenomenal run defender on day one too. So, that was a good pick, I think. And then, later on the board, there were some other very good picks for them as well. Moro Ajomo in round 7, man. I mean, I think I talked to you guys about him a couple times, but I did not expect him to be there. Again, I think he strengthens your defensive line rotation. 6'3", 292, 34.5-inch arms, explosive athlete too. So, I think getting those guys, getting that value at the defensive line, very, very good thing for the Eagles. So I think that was fun. Then Keely Ringo early in round 4 too. I think that value deal as well. His size speed combination for me, getting him in that room behind Darius Slay and James Bradbury, right? They're not going to be long for the Eagles. They're still there until 2025, I think. But, again, you're getting a guy with very, very plus physical traits in that room to learn behind veterans. I think that's a very solid move for them. And then Tyler Steen as well. I forgot about him, but on day 2, I think he projects very well to guard, which is where they're going to play him. He's got the core strength. He's got the athleticism too. He's very well leveraged for his size. And he's got the torque, the finishing torque to power through blocks and kind of pave open lanes. So, I think he's, landing with the Eagles with their coaching staff on the offensive line. Very excited to see what they can do with him. Overall, I think it was a really good class. I think especially early on, they got the value, but later on too, I think he really took advantage of some of the high value deals that were there.
All right. So you're going to have to play guess along with us because John and I have been speculating all the guests we got on this week. Almost every single player the Eagles drafted, depending on whether you looked at Ian Cummings' entire listing of all the players, of Rick Sabatell, all the draft guys, they seem to get value with every single pick. That almost every single player was, quote unquote, expected to go higher than where they went. How does something like that happen? Does Howie Roseman have a magic wand that he gets these guys to drop? The rest of the National Football League just falling behind and paying attention? Is he just smarter than everybody else? How do you go like 7 for 7 and guys drafted lower than what they were expected and then can put on an Eagle jersey?
Yeah, I mean, maybe he does have a magic wand. I don't know. We'll have to kind of do an audit there. But no, I think, especially after round 1, the variance from board to board across all 32 teams increases exponentially, right? So, we all have our media boards and we try to do our best to convey to the public, who you can expect to go where, right? But media boards are imperfect. Media analysis is imperfect, right? The teams have more information to go off of. The teams have very specific preferences that they operate with, and it's different for every single organization. So, the fact of the matter is sometimes guys just fall because of that, right? How the board stacks for teams with their different preferences, their different experiences and perspectives. I think that variance is always so fun to watch because, prospects like Brenton Strange going to the Jacksonville Jaguars on day 2 or Juice Scruggs going to the Texans, right? We didn't expect that, but hey, you look at it and you can kind of look at the traits and you can see you're like, okay, I can kind of understand the reasoning for why they went that high. But just picks like that, you kind of throw a wrench into the process, increase the variability. And on day 3, it's even greater because you go to round 6 or round 7, some teams might have guys that they still had day 2 grades on that are still available, right? So the variability, the variance, across all 32 teams, it's just so difficult to account for from a media perspective. And I think that's why some guys fall. Maybe the Eagles, it looked good for them, but maybe another team that kind of maybe reached in the eyes of the public is still very happy with their picks. So, that variance, I think, is ultimately the main factor.
Yeah. Ask Brad Holmes, Jody. He's happy with his picks. A lot of people question what he did. I want to ask you about Brad, but before I get to him, one guy you didn't mention was Sidney Brown. And from my perspective, because the Eagles have such impressive depth on the defensive line, I expect Jalen Carter to get on the field, but he doesn't need to get on the field because the Eagles have so much depth. Nolan Smith, even more so. Tyler Steen, players like that have chances to play, but they don't need to play. I think Sidney Brown needs to play right away. And it's interesting to pick from my perspective because he played mostly in the box near the line of scrimmage, and the Eagles kept talking about post safety. So it's clearly a projection. Do you project him to have that ability to play that post safety position in the Vic Fangio type defenses around the NFL?
I think you could. I think he has the speed and explosiveness to do it. I would rather play him in the box a little more often just because we've seen it succeed. We've seen that he's very, very effective there with his closing speed, with his physicality, his ability to process route patterns, in the short and intermediate ranges. I think that's something that he does very, very well. So I wouldn't want to take him away from that full time. But I do think he has the projected versatility, the fluidity and smoothness and coverage. As you mentioned, I think the speed, explosiveness for his size, the range, the physicality at the catch point, right? I think he's a little undersized, right? Which is the one big thing for me. It doesn't have quite the catch radius that you'd want, the range to kind of reach over guys in that phase, but he does have the speed and explosiveness. The athleticism is there. The instincts are there. I think from that lens, you can look at it and say, yeah, we can move him back there. It's just, he's so good in the box. He's such an enforcer coming downhill. I wouldn't want to take him from that full time either. So I think ultimately, you look at that, try and just, I think they take solace in just knowing that you can move him around. You can move him around wherever you need him to go. I wouldn't want to take him out of the box full time, but I do think there is some projectability there.
All right. The Eagles are going to have their first rookie camp today, and we know the individuals that were drafted who are coming in, and there have been some reports about the undrafted free agents that they've already signed, and then there'll be a bunch of tryout guys. For those who didn't get drafted, for those who have to come in and sing for their supper and make the roster in this 2-day little open window that some teams have, how much pressure is on these young men? Because, this is their NFL dream. And I'm sure there's a couple guys you would know more than me who wasn't on a roster year 1, got that tryout year 2, or maybe even year 3. Shoot, now we got USFL and XFL for guys to at least keep playing football and the like. How much pressure is there going to be on some of these kids coming into the Eagles?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of pressure. I think, it's different for the guys that have already signed contracts in the undrafted pool. The tryouts that are invited, it's mainly on them. If you're an undrafted free agent, a lot of these contracts are guaranteed, even though they vary greatly in their range. Some guys sign for over 200,000. I think the top one this cycle was 300,000, but then others it's as little as 10,000. So, that range is very vast for UDFAs who do sign contracts. For the guys that don't, right? You get one audition really to kind of prove that, hey, I'm worth sticking around. Now, you mentioned the XFL, that is a buffer for you where you can keep playing football. And I'm glad that that's in place because we're seeing some XFL guys this cycle get opportunities. Like Jack Cohn, I think, got an invite to the Jets camp. I think Freedom Akinmoladun got an invite to the Dolphins camp. So, XFL players, that's another avenue for you to distinguish yourself. But, it is a lot of pressure because it's a very small window for you to make an impression. And there's a lot of guys gunning for the same spots, right? So it's going to be tough, right? For any UDFAs out there, I mean, it's just important to know that it's not necessarily the end of the line. There are other options later on, like the XFL, where you can keep, putting reps on film, and maybe if you make some good plays, teams will keep their eyes on you.
All right, Ian, I want you to put on your GM hat here, which is a little bit different than a scouting hat because I think more comes into it. And I pointed to Detroit and Brad Holmes. He might have gotten 2 great players in the first round of the draft. And maybe that's where it ends for you with Jahmyr Gibbs at number 12, Jack Campbell at number 18. But boy, running back and all-ball linebacker with top 20 picks. Do you factor that into your analysis, the value of where you are and versus what you could have if you manipulate the board a little bit more as a GM?
I think it does factor in. I think there's a lot of factors. And again, it's different for every team because every team has different needs, to go off of, right? Like the Lions, their roster is looking better, right? I would have considered a cornerback in round 1. I do think Deonte Banks would have been a great pick at 18, right? But, you are looking at a roster that is a lot better. You've got your quarterback, you've got wide receiving talent, you've got offensive line talent for sure. You've got, kind of an ascending defensive roster. So I think, running back, especially with the writing was on the wall for DeAndre Swift, they clearly wanted, I think both parties wanted to go in a different direction there. So getting another versatile weapon at running back as well, I think that was a big need for them. And then linebacker as well. I know, being a guy who has lived in Michigan for so many years, watching the Lions growing up, linebacker has not been a position of stability for them. So getting a guy like Jack Campbell, who's 6'5", as athletic and instinctive as he is, I can see that too, but I do think, you do have to play the board a little bit. I think it just depends on, what you as a team, what your view of your needs are, what your view of risk aversion is, right? I think that all factors in. I can see the vision for it. I think it was a reach for both those guys a little bit, but I do think Gibbs especially, he's not just a running back, he's a weapon. He can slot out wide, he can run routes out of the slot too. So I think for Ben Johnson, that creative offensive mind, I think that's very valuable. And then Jack Campbell, he's a linebacker, but he's also a guy who's going to have the green dot from day one. He's going to be a phenomenal locker room addition to a guy who can set the culture for you. So I think looking at that aspect of it, I can see the reasoning for it. And to the credit of the Lions, I think they made up for it a lot by getting Brian Branch in round 2. I think that was a phenomenal value deal. But I just think there's so many factors. Again, even the positional value, that weighs a lot, but there's also cultural impact. There's also, the versatility with Gibbs. And I think those 2 things in particular, they can really sway your board.
Coming up next week, Ian, the NFL is going to release its schedule. And we know for a fact the Eagles are going to play the Giants twice, maybe even 3 times like they played them this year and beat them all 3 times. Sorry about that, Giant fans streaming in here to Birds 365. I think the Giants actually had a sneaky good draft. The Eagles had the best draft in the division. They were the best team and they had the best draft, but I think the Giants at least kept pace. Right? The football team, the Commanders, call them whatever you want, not so much. And I don't think the Cowboys did all that much to help themselves. Quickly, if you want to go through them, but most importantly for me, the Giants. Giants' second best draft in the division behind the Eagles. Is it close, or how do you rate all 3 of the NFC East drafts other than the Birds?
Yeah, so I probably would have had it Eagles, Giants, Commanders, Cowboys. And I think, it's subject to change, right? As a media analyst, I want to reiterate, we don't know how these picks are going to pan out. We really don't. We got to give it the time. And there's some classes in the past that looked kind of iffy on the surface, but really aged well over time. So the Cowboys class could be like that. I think Mozzie Smith adds something very valuable to that defensive line. They got some nice depth pieces on day 3. I think Washington, the big thing for me is Emmanuel Forbes was not quite the best corner on my board at that point, but he's a playmaker through and through. Jartavius Martin, very versatile slot defender too. So, they got some edge depth as well. They got very good offensive linemen and Ricky Stromberg. But the Giants, I think, did have the second best class. I mean, Deonte Banks, for me, was a phenomenal value deal for a team that needed some athleticism, some physicality at corner. They really got it. You get a day 1 starter in John Michael Schmitz at center. You get Jalen Hyatt, a speed threat who can really open up possibilities for that offense. And then on day 3 too, Eric Gray, I think, especially with Saquon Barkley on the franchise tag, I think, getting Eric Gray as a depth running back. He's very, very prolific with his vision, his lateral agility. I think he could go on to be a very valuable rotational running back. Trey Hawkins III from Old Dominion was one of my favorite sleepers at CB in the class. Another very physical guy, long, athletic, very, very good agility and explosiveness too, but he's got the ball skills to make plays at the catch point. And then even after that, Gervarius Owens, depth at safety, Jordan Riley can be a rotational piece on the defensive line. He's got the size to play nose tackle too. So, I think the Giants hit it pretty well in terms of the value board all across the board, but especially those first 3 picks. I think those guys are difference makers from day one.
Yeah, and you talk about bit, Ian. I mean, I was thinking like best bit for the draft. Like Deontay Banks to me is a Wink Martindale guy.
Oh,
I
yeah,
mean,
for
that is like the best bit in the first round. But you just talk about bit. That guy bits what they want to do. Whereas if he came here and it's all quarters coverage, I go, I don't know. I don't know. So bit is a big thing, but all right, I want to go negative here. That's what we do in the media. We get yelled at for it. Give me a team or two that you didn't like in the draft around the NFL, at least as much as the others.
It's tough, man, because I can see reasoning for most of them. Yeah, and I sit on the fence all the time. I'm way too diplomatic as a draft analyst. I've kind of accepted it. That's my role here. One team I didn't really like, and it's for one reason: the 49ers drafting a kicker.
Well, they didn't pick till the 3rd round. Yeah,
I know,
but I get you with the kicker. Yeah,
well. There's still so much talent left on the board at that point. That's the thing for me, right? Like anytime you draft a kicker that early, it's such a volatile position from year to year. Like a guy might be an all-pro one year and the next year, kind of gets a case of the yips and then his job might be on the line, right? You miss a couple extra points in a row. So it's such a volatile position for me, even if your roster is fairly solid across the board, just, taking that luxury that early for me was a little iffy. There weren't too many classes that it was more just individual picks. Like maybe it's a little too high.
Give me
for
a couple picks you didn't like.
Stetson Bennett for the Rams was one. I think round 4 was a little too early for him. I would consider him draftable, right? He's athletic. He's a tough competitor. He was very productive at Georgia, but I just think, the arm talent is kind of middling for him too. And I think the processing isn't quite where you want it to be. So, he was more of a guy who, I would have preferred round 6 or round 7, solid backup candidate. But again, round 4, there's still a lot of talent available on the board at other positions of need. And the Rams roster is very, very thin across the board. So I would have probably used it on another talent at that point. And then, I don't know, Brenton Strange was a little bit of a reach for me for the Jaguars on day 2. But again, I can see it, right? Evan Ingram might not be a long-term, maintenance for you. I think he's got talent for sure, run after catch ability, but just little reaches like that. And again, we could look back in 2 to 3 years and they pan out. So, overall, there weren't too many drafts that I couldn't get behind. I think this class in particular was very deep, and that allowed teams to kind of capitalize later on.
All right. And about the Rams and Stetson Bennett, I kind of like the guy. He's a winner. I would have said 5th rather than 4th, but are we splitting hairs here? Maybe. If he's their backup quarterback, doesn't matter. 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. Do they have another quarterback on their roster? Or are Stafford and he the only 2 guys? The 49ers, I think, have 5 veteran quarterbacks, if you consider Brock Purdy a veteran.
They're just collecting.
They just keep adding guys. Meanwhile, out there in the NFC West, I don't think the Rams have another quarterback. Are they almost putting too much pressure on the championship quarterback from Georgia, who I'm shocked didn't end up with the Eagles because they get everybody else from Georgia? Why not the quarterback? Are they putting him in an untenuous situation that Stetson Bennett could have to step in and play serious time for the Rams next year if Stafford goes down again?
I don't think they're putting too much pressure on him because he is a day 3 pick, right? I think it's tough because this class, especially in round 4, there was so much talent left on the board for me that I would have rather, especially for the Rams. I mean, I think you can upgrade edge, interior defensive line, linebacker, corner. I mean, a lot of positions are in dire straits for the Rams. So, it's not a pick I would have made that early. I think there were some guys available in round 7, that might have been able to suffice, right? But he could play. You look at Stafford, who's aging. He's been injured in recent years too. I think Stetson Bennett could be thrust into a situation where he's starting. And I think that, it could be a little hairy. One thing that I do like about Bennett, though, is that, he is very athletic. I mean, you look at him work the pocket. He can evade rushers. He can extend plays. I think that aspect of his game is very strong. And then he has shown at least that he can work in rhythm. He can operate in structure. I think that will allow him to keep the team afloat. Is he going to be anything in the long-term future of the Rams, right? I don't think he's more than a backup, but I do think you mentioned he's a winner. He's a gamer. He's got competitive toughness. He's very athletic. Those are traits that I do look for in backups. At the very least, I want you to be able to come in and keep the engine churning, and I think he can do that.
By the way, Joe, to answer your question, they just signed Brett Rippon.
Brett Rippon. How'd I miss that key signing?
And Ian can tell you about Dresser Wynn. They signed him as an undrafted free agent. I can't give you any information.
Who's Dresser Wynn, Ian?
I'll be honest. He kind of fell beyond my jurisdiction cycle.
Yeah. Okay. Even Ian doesn't know.
Hey,
so
if Ian doesn't know, that means the guy was hanging out on Santa Monica Boulevard last week, and I said, "Hey, we need somebody else to throw the football around. Come in this week for our rookie practices."
By the way, one quarterback Ian will know is Tanner McKee. So that was one of the ones I think the quarterback factory, the Eagles, they get joked about that for a long time, but they brought in Marcus Mariota to back up Jalen Hurts, and a lot of people said at least he can do some of the same things, obviously not as well as Jalen Hurts, but you can run the same offense, and that was the thought process there. Even Ian Book has some of those movement skills from we saw it his days at Notre Dame. Tanner McKee, the exact opposite. I mean, 6'6", Mike Glennon-like in the pocket. That's kind of a weird fit, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it is. And, you mentioned it too. Quarterback is a numbers game, right? If you only have two, then I can kind of understand picking a guy on day 3, but they already had 3 guys, Marcus Mariota and Ian Book. So, I would have probably stood pat with those 3 and picked another talented player at a skill position at that point. Now, again, I think at round 6, right? So the opportunity cost is not too low if you go elsewhere. But, again, I just think there was still a lot of talent left on the board, a very deep class. I probably wouldn't have taken a quarterback there. I will say McKee, while he does kind of fit that archetype, he's that pocket passer. He's not going to move around a ton. He does have one of the strongest arms in the class. He legitimately can generate very good velocity. He can hit those short and intermediate routes, with a lot of pace too. So I think, that aspect of his game is solid. I think getting him out of that Stanford long mesh offense will be very good for him, because that didn't always do the best things for his processing experience, right? Kind of honing that part of his game. But he's got arm talent. He's a good leader, good character from all counts. So I think, he's a good addition to the QB room. It's just, if you already have 3, if you already have a solid backup in Mariota, who's got starting experience and mobility, I'm not sure how much of a need it is.
You still like Ian Book, huh?
I don't. I mean, I listen, as an Ian, I gotta cape for the Ians of the world. But he's got
my head. I forgot about it. Hey, I love the Jets' first round draft pick because its last name's McDonald. So I'll cut you any Ian slack you need cut.
Yes, sir. No, but I think he's mobile. At least, again, ideally you don't have to play him at all. But if he's your QB3, if he's got experience in the offense, I can at least see keeping him there. You're right. So it's one of those things.
Let me run this by both of you two guys as a potential line of thinking for the Eagles. And John would know better because he's got sources on the Eagles. I just sit back and analyze. Maybe their thinking was, rather than if you got the backup who's the same as your guy, you're going to plug him in, but you're thinking long term, we want the opposite of the quarterback that we have. Not the same, we want the opposite, because we can prep, we can get ready, we can get our guys up to speed. Hey, when we change this position, the offense changes and your responsibility changes. We want you up to speed to be able to play these both different ways. And oh, by the way, let the defense figure it out. That they're prepping all week for Jalen Hurts and the way he plays. And hey, we got to watch the run and the RPOs. They're bringing in this other quarterback. And the Eagle offense changes on the fly. Defense might not be ready for that. Any chance that's their line of thinking as to why they took a standstill quarterback?
It could be. I mean, I think it's a little difficult to make those infrastructure changes from week to week if you need to, right? I would rather have a guy who has similar tools so that you don't have to make those changes, because that's more on your plate in mid-season when there's already a lot on your plate, right? I'd rather have a guy who has similar tools so you can kind of keep it flowing without too much obstruction there. So
it might help on the scout team, I guess, if you're playing a pocket passer on a particular week to have a legitimate pocket passer. But I think
we're smarter than the other team.
But I will say Nick Sirianni loves Phillip Rivers. I say it, loves him, and is, very competent in working with a quarterback like that. I think he's just trying to find a good quarterback and trying to develop him. And, he sees some traits in the kid he likes, and he's not fearful of changing his offense because he's done it so many times. Phillip Rivers to Jalen Hurts, that's pretty, it's a pretty drastic change. So I think he's kind of comfortable with it. Make sure you follow Ian Cummings at IC_draft. You see there. Last one for me, and we started with 2024. I'll go back to 2024. We've seen this in the past with quarterbacks. I mean, there's a lot of hype early for Sam Howell. Didn't end up that way. The Clemson kid I loved. Boy, I screwed up on that one. Spencer Rattler, he was everything until Caleb Williams came in. Any chance Williams, what's the bet? It isn't at the top of next year's draft. We've seen it happen so many times, but he seems to be a higher level prospect.
Yeah, there's always a chance. I never want to say 100% this guy's
Especially
number
with
one.
Lincoln Riley, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so much volatility from year to year. It's tough. I never want to lock that in. I will say one thing that I look for, because it's dangerous, anointing quarterbacks too early. So one thing I look for to separate them this early on is the physical tools. Like, do they at least have the physical tools to be considered in that top 5 range? Because that's a range that's really, only reserved for guys who have that franchise level ability. And he definitely has the tools, right? He's a very good athlete, very good creator. The arm elasticity for him is just absurd, working off platform, but generating velocity too. Very good competitive toughness, right? So, I think he checks all those boxes. And then Drake May too, from North Carolina, 6'4", 220, very easy arm talent. Again, he's got a really quick release, but really good velocity on his throws. He can mix pace and touch, but a very good athlete too. So, I look for the physical tools at first for me to say, like, all right, like, this guy's not locked into the number 1 spot, but I can actually see an argument for him. If we were projecting ahead, ideally, you're not making that big of a leap, but people want to read 2024 mock drafts. They want that content right when you switch over. So, you need to at least be able to project, and looking at those guys, I think they do have the tools to do it. Again, you never want to commit to anything. You never want to leap to hyperbole, but there is a reason to look ahead and say, like, if one guy was going to go that high, it would be him.
And I agree with your read on the draft. This past year was going to be Young and Stroud 1-2. What happened? It was Young and Stroud 1-2. 2 years before, it was going to be Trevor Lawrence number 1. Guess what? Trevor Lawrence went number 1. So the outlier is that middle Sam Howell, Spencer Rattler year when you really didn't have any quarterbacks. Kenny Pickett's the first pick in the mid-first round, and then you drop off to the 3rd round. So it wasn't the projection. It was the fact that it just wasn't that good a class. So people were reaching. Oh, you're not reaching for either Williams or May. They're both legit. I'll go on record right now, 360 days in advance and 355, whatever. Yeah, they'll be the first 2 players off the board taking this upcoming year. All right, last thing, Ian. The draft is great, and we all just turn off the rest of our lives for you're leading up the entire year to those 3 days. Is there a letdown afterwards for not only a guy like you, who this is your livelihood, but for McMullen and McDonald, an Eagle fan, every other fan out there? When the draft is over and done with, you get to analyze and break it apart, rank and everything. But then it's over and it's done with. Then we now got to wait a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years to actually go, yeah, we were right about that. What a draft. Holy mackerel, did we miss the boat on that one? We look great on paper and then it didn't appear on the field. How long do you have to wait before you, in your mind, can legitimately say, yeah, that was a great draft, or, oh my God, that was a god-awful draft? What's the number? Can you do it after 1 year, 2? Do you want to go all the way to 5? How do you put a time frame on when it is legitimately time to go back in 2020 hindsight and say, hell of a draft or god-awful draft?
Yeah, I mean, the key is being patient, right? Like, if you want to take a victory lap, then by all means, if it's looking that way after after year 1, go ahead. But me personally, I don't like taking victory laps, right? Because you never know how it's going to pan out. Even after 1 year or 2 years, it might be trending a certain way. But I do think, if you really want a concrete answer, I'd say 2 or 3 years is probably when you kind of know how the draft is panning out. But then even then, I mean, Geno Smith, when he got drafted by the Jets, yeah, we all thought he was a bust for forever.
Yeah.
And then he became a Pro Bowler with the Seahawks. So, I mean, again, it's one of those things where, it really takes a long time. Every developmental track is different. I would say 2 to 3 years is probably the minimum for me. After 1 year, you kind of get the initial implications, right? But there's still room for guys to keep growing. Guys are maturing at different paces, right? So, I think there's so much variability that I want to wait a little bit longer, 2 to 3 years. Once you get to that point, then go ahead and take your victory lap. But, I think before that, it's a little too early just because it does take time for things to settle differently for players.
All right, I'll give you a chance since you brought up his name. The NFC quarterbacks, probably Rodgers going to the AFC, Carr coming to the NFC. At best, they're even. It's not like they added a major player. Geno Smith going to make a Pro Bowl again this year? And I'm not talking about the after the fact, the ninth quarterback name for the NFC Pro Bowl, because the first 5 have dodged and or in the Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts will be in that category. Is he going to be one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the NFC again this year?
Yeah, and I will say the Pro Bowl is not the best indicator. Like I should have just said, I mean, he was very productive last year.
But he was a Pro Bowl player. You're right.
Yeah, but Tyler Huntley was too. So it's like, again, like it's not a great indicator 1-to-1. It's more, Geno was productive last year. He was very efficient last year, and I think he's got a good offensive line. He's got DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. I think it's a perfect fit in the slot in that offense. I think he's got the firepower to do it, the blocking. I think the one thing is just, are we going to see a regression from him? Because he was very good, but he was better earlier last year. He started to fall off a little bit down the stretch. So I'm curious if we're going to see a regression. I think he's got the athleticism, the processing, the accuracy to be very good, but hopefully he doesn't fall off the cliff, because I think it's been a very good kind of redemption story in the NFL.
Yeah.
All right, since you went to the Seahawks now, we're keeping Ian there. He just keeps giving me other questions I want to ask. Zach Charbonnet was one of my favorite players coming into the draft. I thought that he was a perfect fit for the Eagles. If there had been a possibility they could move up in the second round, knew they weren't going to use either of their first on him, knew they'd never get him with the third, so I had to be the second, and they were drafting late in the second. And, of course, he goes mid-second to Seattle. They've already got Walker there. Charbonnet in Seattle, I didn't see it unless they think these 2 very young guys are going to be a great combination. How do you think they're going to use Charbonnet in Seattle?
Yeah, I think you're looking at a guy who's a little more of an early down runner, which is kind of interesting because I think Walker, was kind of trending up towards having that volume last year. But I think Charbonnet, around 6 foot, 220 range again. So he's got the mass for sure. He's got the density. He's a hard charging runner in open field. Not the most flexible guy. I think he can be a little stiff in the hips sometimes. But again, he's got foot speed, physicality, contact balance for sure, explosiveness up the field too. So I think he's that early down guy. Maybe in goal line situations too. He's got a little more mass to plow through than Walker does. But I think you kind of mix and match. You can kind of ride the hot hand for sure. And I thought it was, I wasn't expecting them to pick a running back, but I do think
neither was I.
The Seahawks.
I don't think anybody was. Everybody knocked him for that, but I like the Seahawks draft.
I mean, you need a stable of running backs nowadays.
Yeah.
So you need multiple guys. And I think especially, for the Seahawks, they've proven in the past. I mean, they kind of did it with Walker when they still had Rashad Penny. Like, if there's a good running back that we like, we're going to take him, right? So I think, getting Charbonnet and Walker.
And at number 52, I don't have a problem with it. If we were, 30s, I'd have a problem with it. But I thought, they had a top 5 draft to me, the Seahawks. I think they're really, I think their roster is better than most people understand. I think they're a good team. I really do.
Yep, they got Derek Hall from Auburn in round 2. I was a big fan of that fit. I think they scored some value in most.
I like Bradford at
the guard,
well.
athletic. He's powerful. He's a refrigerator in open space, man.
Then Witherspoon, and as you mentioned before, and Jigba at the top. I mean, that's tremendous at the top. Yeah, I like.
Yeah, but if you're the 7th pick in the draft as a cornerback, how good do you have to be? That's pretty high pick to be.
Fifth pick.
I know.
Fifth pick.
Fifth pick. Excuse me. I know we talk about linebackers being underrated and running back being underrated. Corners are still evaluated pretty high, but at number 5,
your guy Sauce Gardner, baby,
corners come off the board at number 5.
Your guy Sauce Gardner gave everybody excitement. So did Patrick Surtain, is a great player, and J.C. Horn is really good. So
the interesting thing with those guys is Sauce and Pat Surtain had the size and athleticism that Devin Witherspoon lacks. That was kind of surprising to me. But Witherspoon is very instinctive in coverage, high energy athlete. He's a gnat. He'll get in your grill. I love the physicality, the production. I think I could see it, right? It was a little early for me, but I think you need the traits, right? You need to be like 6'2", you need to be very athletic, you need to be long, physical, right? But
yeah, I like
he's a good player.
Gonzalez better. I will
So do
say
I.
that.
Maybe
but
that's why I'm
he
questioning
fell a
it.
little bit.
I think Gonzalez is going to turn into a better player. But
As talented as he is, man, no one brings the physicality that Witherspoon has. So I will say that.
Okay, and that plays well in Seattle.
Mhm.
Ian, good stuff. Appreciate it. Whenever you come aboard, we'll certainly be touching base when the season starts again, and we start asking about, hey, how about 3 weeks in? There's no question the 2 quarterbacks are the best in the draft. Right? Or where'd this other quarterback come? Yeah, we'll get you back on again and start picking your brain again. Thank you very much for doing it with us today.
Yep,
Thanks,
thank you.
Ian. Appreciate it.
Check out his work at profootballnetwork.com. Ian Cummings here with us on Birds.
By the way, Jody, real quick, I know we got to hit the break because Kyle Brandt did his NFC and AFC quarterback tiers. I thought he did a really good job in the NFC. He had, because you brought up Geno Smith, he had him in tier 3.
So he separated them.
Yeah,
AFC, NFC.
Yeah, obviously the AFC is much better, but his NFC tier, Jalen Hurts was the only one in tier 1, which I agree with. I think he did a really good job with it. Geno was in tier 3, which is still good in that conference.
Who was in tier 2?
Tier 2 was Dak, which should be Stafford, and Cousins was tier 2. Tier 3 was Goff and Carr and Geno. And I agree with.
Out of those rankings, I would say he's under ranking Goff. Goff had a damn good year.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with moving Goff up to. I said that before. He'd be in the conversation. To be honest, I think he's better than people think. I think he might be the second best quarterback in the NFC. I've been saying that for weeks, but he's got to do it a little bit more. I think he's got to prove it a little bit more. He had a bad ending with the Rams, and I think that still carries over a little bit, but I think he's gotten a lot better. I think he might be at the end of the year. I think he might be the second best quarterback in the NFC.
I wouldn't have a problem putting him right there right now off the year that he had last year. All right, he's McMullen. I'm McDonald. It's the Mac Bird 365, guys. We got plenty yet to do, including talking to our buddy Kevin Kincaid from Crossing Broad. A little bit of different look at the Eagles. Love the.
By the way, Kincaid's slumming. I looked at Crossing Broad yesterday. He's talking to Josh Shapiro. He's talking to the governor of Pennsylvania. He's slumming coming on with us.
Well, then we won't point out the fact that he's slumming because we'd like to have him on the show again down the road, John. Yeah, kind of keep that one on your hat.
I'm just talking about the governor. That's a good get. That's a good get.
Oh, more power. You want to ask him about the governor? You go ahead and ask him about the governor. He's John McMullen. I'm Jody McDonald. You got Birds 365 on. Stay with us.